Yeah, it's great to be back in the sealed section. I guess people might be assuming that we're just, the end of this game is the same as the original and still sticking around even now.
Totally. If you finish the original Final Fantasy VII, you're not going to get as much warning, but still fucking stop listening because let's start spoiling this right now. This game is absolutely not a remake.
It's very different in what it has within the course of the game. I'm not convinced that it all has a direct and ongoing bearing on the playing out of the rest of the plot. I think that's what we disagree on. Because I loved it. I loved it all the way through. This is a 9.5 out of 10 game for me. So beautiful visually, so fun. I love the combat. I don't understand. Like, I've seen a few people, some of our listeners have some issues with it. I just think it's fantastic. It's one of the most fluid, enjoyable combat systems I've ever played in a game. I
think with the combat, it was a sticking point for me early on as well that it was so similar to an action game that the timing of dodging and that sort of stuff was difficult for me to adapt to in what this game is asking of you. So I can see people having that trouble throughout the entire game and not really enjoying the combat, which I think has been a big complaint for people. But yeah, I agree that the combat is great once you kind of come to grips with it. And I also agree that our biggest difference on this game is in two parts: the execution of the ending and the implications of the ending. I think are the two big things that I want to talk about for sure.
Yes. What didn't you like about the execution of the ending?
So the last, what would you call it, maybe hour and a half of the game is where it really ramps up with the stuff that was not in the original. Obviously,
sure, essentially, it gets to the end of the highway. And exactly. in the original game, you get to the end of the highway, you climb a little rope down, and then you leave Midgar. And that is not what happens at the end of this game.
No. And I think absolutely I will say, first of all, that conceptually, I think it's really cool, the idea that they've had for what to do with this remake. I think the idea of it being like a sequel, to my mind, is cool. And playing off the expectations of people who have played that first game and using them to create a new story that is like a direct result and an indirect opposition to what that first game was is cool.
Right.
I think that's a really good idea.
Potentially what future games are going to be this sort of like intellectual narrative conversation with what the original story was. And the expectations and the history of it, the nostalgia that people have for it, just like that in culture.
At best, it will be that weird like metatextual thing, which I think people are maybe giving a little too much credit for this one for saying that it contains that stuff. Because like there's people saying that like the whispers represent the fans and that they want everything exactly the same, but they're subverting that. I'm willing to bet that the first time that is brought up to, I forget the name of the writer of this game, he grits his teeth and goes, yeah, definitely, I thought of that. 100%. Yep, 1 million, yes. Absolutely. I think that's giving a little bit, maybe not, but the broader implication of the way that this deals with like the fact that the characters can see the future in parts and that they're trying to combat that. And the fact that the last thing the game says is the unknown adventure will continue, I think explicitly tells people that like the next game or games will not be as direct of a remake as this one is.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I do think
for now,
that my feeling about it is, firstly, what's contained within the game that we played, I love all of it. It's great. I like how it plays out. Or at least as a whole, I like it. I didn't love the existence of the whispery flying around things, but also I didn't really care. And in some stages, they looked cool, like the big finale with the Shinra Tower and them all swirling around. I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting image. They're sort of creepy looking. But yeah, what happens within this game is essentially the same thing that happens in the original. Like Cloud sort of gets together with Avalanche. They start to fight Shinra. Sephiroth gets involved, and all of a sudden things pivot to this greater enemy that they're going to follow throughout the rest of the world. And by the end of this game, that's kind of what's happened. That is what's happened.
Yeah, the differences, the big ones in just how the story plays out are A, that Sephiroth is involved right from the start, and B, that, well, taking away all the broader stuff about the story, I think, because I do like the idea of it, I think the way that it is done in that last hour and a half of the game is fucking terrible compared to the rest of the game. It is so rapid of a change. It is such a breakneck turn, not in necessarily terms of the plot that bothered me, but in terms of how the characters are reacting to all the stuff that's going on with them. All of them except for Cloud and I guess Aerith, who seems to know more than she's letting on or whatever, have no reason to know what the fuck Sephiroth is doing,
This
who
is
he
true.
really is, why he's there, and all of a sudden they're like, yeah, man, let's go into that fucking portal. Not one of them is like, hey, quick question, what are we doing? And how are we suddenly powerful enough to fight Destiny?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know why I didn't mind all of that stuff because like I love the original game. It's one of my favorite games, and this is a massive departure in tone as much as like literally what's happening. It's very anime. It's very sort of mystical, like spiritual, ethereal stuff that is in the original game, in the live stream stuff, but is much more in the original game. I think like just a metaphor for togetherness, empathy, and caring about the natural world. This is not that, right? Like this is something completely different.
And it's not built up to at all in the same way as the first game. The story slowly introduces each of these elements of like, you find out that Sephiroth is even involved around the same time in the story. Like the number of hours is obviously different, but in terms of the plot, you find out at the same time as this. And then if the original were to have transitioned to be like, suddenly everyone gets exactly who he is, wants to fight him, and knows that he's a threat to the planet, it would have been so weird. And that is exactly what happens here. And it's one of those things where I feel like it's only missing a few short lines of dialogue of Barrett going like, who the fuck is this guy? And Aerith going like, this is who he is. And you're like, oh, okay, cool.
Right.
Because like, they have set it up to be explained in later games, and I think that makes this first one suffer at the moment because it is a full story that absolutely doesn't make sense towards the end and ends on a cliffhanger that is not satisfyingly delivered to me.
Well, so it only doesn't make sense at all if you have never played the original, which is definitely a flaw. It's like empirically a flaw with this game. If what your part of the sort of point is like this game should be accessible to anyone who plays it, whether they're 15 years old and have never played any of the original or don't know anything about it, or someone who's 35 years old and played the original and loved it. Right. But okay, I guess just from my own subjective perspective, I did play the original. I know the story back to front, and it feels like it was sort of made for someone like me who goes, okay, I'm imagining those lines of dialogue. I'm filling in those blanks.
Right.
And I think it's only really an issue of pacing. Like, it isn't an issue of, like, leaving out facts. It's more just, like, it's harder to come to grips with if you're viewing this as, like, a brand new, fresh story that's literally never been told before in any way.
Well, and if you're viewing it as that for the characters who are in it as well. I think that was my major problem with it.
Yes.
Is that that group of people haven't been through this before, and yet they suddenly act in the way of the story being written from the point of view of someone who knows who Sephiroth is and knows what's going on. And like they've been shown, it kind of very vaguely shows them seeing glimpses of the future or whatever, so you can infer that was all the information that they needed delivered to them very quickly. But it doesn't convey that well enough that the story kind of holds together in itself in that last little bit. Like metatextually and all of that, I agree that it does make sense. I'm not confused by sort of the intention of what they're doing of saying like, here's these multiple dimensions. And it's not that complicated. Sephiroth is more powerful than he seemed to be in the first one in some way, because he's clearly got this ability to travel either in time or interdimensionally to affect events so that, again, he wins.
Right.
And that overall is a really cool idea and a good way to do this remake, to bring back that sense of like danger and to bring something new to it for the people who have played the original. But then the fault of that is, like you said, it demands that people have played the original to get everything that they can out of this.
Yeah. Yeah. Which, like, is if you're doing a product review, you got to say that and you got to take points off. Like, it's not a complete experience.
Right.
And in and of itself.
And it is being marketed to people as though it is. They're saying it's the first part, but they're also saying it's a remake, which I would argue that it isn't, because the story directly contains references that are unexplained within this game to the original.
Yeah, I don't know about that though. Like, I think, like, sure, I think it's valid to be like, why did Barrett and Tifa and Red 13 just go along with everything at the end? And maybe the explanation is because what was happening was insane, and how would anyone react in that situation? Like, oh, there's a evil guy who, like, with stuff like Sephiroth, it's like he looks like a villain. I mean, if I'm living in that world, I'm like, oh, that's the bad guy, definitely. You don't need to explain that to me.
I'm in anime world, sure, but like also a bad guy wouldn't have nice hair like that, and like all the.
Sure.
I don't know about that. His little smile. I trust it for some reason, but
that's. I mean, But so, like, yes, it's weird that they just sort of go along with it, but maybe I don't know. Like, I think you just go along with that as like an anime logic. Like, what else are they gonna
It just
do?
bugged me a bit towards the end when the rest of it had been so, like, had taken its time so much with exploring all these very emotional things of how these characters were feeling as well, and it went into that more deeply than the original game did.
Yes,
Barrett's feelings of anxiety around whether or not Marlene's safe was the big one that I thought was done really, really well in this game.
Sure. I mean, all of the stuff about
and all of that stuff.
Avalanche being potentially in the wrong, like being possibly responsible for the deaths of thousands of people as revolutionaries fighting against an evil and oppressive regime. It's like, well, that's a very interesting theme to explore, and they did, and they fleshed that out heaps. I think
much.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, to have that much put into it for there, and then in the last hour and a half to have the only kind of new stuff, or like most of the new stuff that you're not ready for in the game, to all come bombarding at you at once, and then to not have a few lines in there of having these characters who you now have so deeply over that time explored, to suddenly have their personalities be taken away from them, it felt like, was a weird kind of jarring thing, where even if just Aerith and Cloud seem to kind of get what's going on. Cloud knows he's seeing visions of this guy, and this guy wants something from him. Aerith seems to have some understanding of what is taking place beyond what she is telling them, which, you see those flashes of Marlene and Red 13 kind of being able to see into her head or whatever, and going like, oh, cool, I get it. So even having like just Aerith go to all of them, they're like, what the fuck's this? And she's like, don't worry, we got to do this. Trust me. And they're like, okay, I guess you help Marlene, sure.
Right.
It was just that little bit of it seemed missing to me, where it made this whole extra fight seem really almost like gratuitous, and like, I get you need to put a big boss battle at the end, but it didn't earn for me, through how emotional the rest of the game had succeeded at being, this big twist that it is doing. It felt a little cheaper because it wasn't explored as deeply as these other things, and that might be rectified in retrospect with the subsequent games. But
I think the reason that I don't mind as much is I don't believe they're going to change the upcoming games heaps. I think what they're doing here is giving themselves the ability to change it slightly. Like, it's removing the need to stick to every single plot point. I think they're just giving themselves the room to move slightly away from what originally happens, to make it harder to predict, possibly. but also to remove that sort of sword hanging above them of like, you have to stick to the original game in every subsequent part or the fans will get really mad at you. I don't know that it's like, I think it's done for creative reasons more so than like, or like for reasons to allow some creativity within the scope of the existing games rather than blowing it all up and doing something new. I think that's why I'm not as bothered by it, is because I don't expect them to change things wholesale.
I do, and I'm not bothered by that. I like the idea, and I think it's exciting for me having played both, the original as well. Because if you look at the changes that they have already made, like several major characters are still alive who were dead. Or there's something with Zack being in some way alive and maybe a parallel universe, who knows?
Yeah.
Sephiroth's whole thing is completely different now. You've already fought him. He already has some kind of intention for you. He's communicating directly with Cloud. That whole thing is different in this game, and certainly I don't think we'll get less different in future games.
Sure.
Biggs is still alive for some reason. At least.
That's odd. Yeah, that was odd.
And I wonder if it is to set up the expectation that, hey, people who died in the original can survive, maybe. Who knows?
Yeah.
Maybe Aerith's okay. Who knows?
And I think they're going to do that, and then they're going to shrug it off, and then they're going to go through with killing her. That's what I think. It's like, you think so. Wedge dies, doesn't he? Wedge survives initially and then dies later on, but Biggs is the one who survives.
Because he gets sucked off by the whispers in the elevator, right?
Yes. Yeah. But then late at the very end, like Biggs wakes up in his bed and he's alive. What I think, and so this is, I think, how I feel about all of the very, very sort of metaphysical stuff that happens in the game. All of the stuff that's sort of like interdimensional or weird, like mental images and Sephiroth communicating psychically with everyone. It's not, and I know that this is like in the original game, the metaphysical stuff had as much bearing on the plot as the physical stuff. But I kind of am treating personally what happened in this game in metaphysical instances as outside of sort of what's important to me. Like it's all representative of stuff. Like it's Sephiroth and Cloud having a mental battle metaphorically and I'm just sort of taking it more as like storytelling devices, ways to sort of turn emotions and like mental battles into something you can see. And then the actual differences that have happened in the world that we've seen are Biggs survives. But they so explicitly say, we don't know what's going to happen now. Everything is different now. This is an untraveled ground. The game brings up a fucking thing saying like, hey, fucking James Bond will return. Like, the changes are so dramatic in their presentation, and the implications, if you take them at face value, are so big that I would be kind of disappointed if the second part was just a remake of the second portion of Final Fantasy VII, because they've had this cool idea, and I think that if they then deliver on the possibilities of that, it will make my feelings about how this changes different. Because at the moment, with this as an individual isolated thing, the ending detracts from the overall product if it is to be a direct remake. Right. But the ending adds sort of an unnecessary
of
weird sidestep at the end. It's poorly paced and it's just not as good.
Right. Exactly. If they then brush off everything they did at the end of this one for the second part and say, now we're in fucking Nibelheim and now we're in, here's that big snake and everything's the same, don't worry about it. I think that would then make me solidify my feelings of discomfort with the ending of this one, because it means that they were just like, we need a big boss battle at the end. What if we don't want to fight Sephiroth? We should do it. You know what I mean? Like, yeah.
That's what I think is what they thought. Like, how do we do like an interesting and creative and weird... Yeah, how do we come up with an interesting way to do that, to integrate or include or add weird boss battles at the end of this chapter? I just feel like, I don't know if it's going to be this wholesale change. I think it's probably going to be a more subtle touch, a subtle series of changes in the upcoming games. I don't know. because you're right. Like it's implying significant change. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not overly pessimistic about it. What I don't think is going to happen is it's not going to refer to fucking a book that was written, 10 years ago by someone who's not actually involved in the game. I don't think it's going to draw on story elements from Final Fantasy VII Advent Children. I don't think we're in danger of any of the theories that I've seen on Reddit being true.
Sure. I think it already has done that a little bit much, or a little bit more than you would have expected, for sure. And I guess I don't really mind if it does do all that stuff, because it's the same world, right? You're still going to go to the same locations, which is I guess the main part of a remake anyway, is seeing all that stuff be redone. Personally, I'm totally okay with the idea of them making this a new story and a sequel and everything, as long as they deliver it well, which just the last sort of hour and a half, 2 hours of this is not done well.
Right.
That's fair. Me, it just, like, the dialogue made a big change. All of a sudden, Cloud can cut a fucking bus in half that's flying at it like that. Just the whole tone completely shifted at the end there, where it's like, fucking, why are you fighting? I don't get why you're like, hey, let's kill Destiny because fucking Sephiroth told you to as well. Like, you don't know this cunt. He's showing up and he's being like, hey, I killed you, Barrett, but now you kill someone for me, please. And he's like, yeah, I guess we got to. What the fuck? What do you mean? No, that doesn't make any sense. Don't do that. Yeah.
I don't know. I just was along for the ride. I don't think that it was ever going to... I sort of categorized all of that stuff at the end as not being as important as what I thought was like actually happening in the real world of the story. Maybe that is only because I played the original and have that story in my head and can refer back to it and have nostalgia for that and have that make sense. But I almost just, compartmentalized it as like, oh, this is happening in not reality. And so I'm not as bothered by it. And I'm enjoying the fights. Like I really loved playing it. I loved playing through the ending, regardless of how ridiculous the story was. I thought it was really fun.
The music was really cool,
great.
And even though it's like weird, the reasons why it's happening, hearing the fucking Sephiroth big theme and all of that is cool.
Yeah.
And that is definitely a part of why they did it. And I guess you're only fighting his clone, right? Is that the thing? Or like, I didn't even know this until I was reading stuff about the ending, but that Sephiroth you're following for all of 7 is a clone or something.
Right. Yeah. Because at the end of the original, you find the real one in the crater at the top. It's this giant, he's, a monster. But all of the ones that you're coming across, I guess in the remake as well as the original, are the Genova clones of Sephiroth, I think.
Because the two apparently that you're seeing in the remake, and I didn't get this from the actual game, which again, I take to be not a sign of me being a fucking dumbass, because I know that already, but more a sign of the game has not expressed itself. But those two clones who you see, the one who's like in the kids' playground and the one who's your neighbor, there's two apparently Sephiroths that you see during the game, and those are the two.
I think I got that. They call them different names. One of them who's in the apartment next to you, and the one you see later on. But also, it does rely on you remembering that aspect of the original, because
and I guess
I
one
think
of
the
them
first time I
jumps
played
off the roof.
when
you climbs that big tower,
when the helicopter's there. The first time I played the original, I did not understand the story, I think, at all. Like, certainly the reunion stuff was not something I picked up on until I was older, because I did play it as a kid. But like, knowing that and understanding that, knowing that all of these weird guys in black cloaks and Cloud are just like genetic offcuts and clones of the original Sephiroth or Genova, or a mix. I guess I'm still
Genova
unclear on that.
At some point, Sephiroth was a clone of Genova, or in some way, Sephiroth is that meteor.
Yes.
Right? That like hit the Earth, and either that thing has taken over the actual person's brain, or he was that all along, or whatever it is. But I like the idea more that this is the Sephiroth from the original, somehow time traveling or whatever, and trying to win again, and everything will change because of that. I think that's a really cool idea. delivered well in the last tiny portion of this game as a twist, which I take it to be, but in retrospect could become absolutely fine. If the second game opens with Tifa being like, hey, what the fuck was that? Like, I didn't say anything at the time because I was like, hey, I guess these guys know what they're doing, but that fucking confused the shit out of me. Then
Right.
I'll be like, Tifa, you're right. Good core work. Your abs are great.
Yep.
Keep it up.
And
the
then
voice of the
someone
people.
please explain what the fuck's going on.
Yeah.
And then we can
I
go
think
on our quest.
If it is that thing, and I'm surprised that I guess the lack of import that you've given it towards, or with your impression of how it factors into the story, because if it is just a side thing, then I think that's also really fucking weird.
I don't. Yeah, I think I've compartmentalized it in my experience of playing the game that we just played because it's like a 9.5 out of 10, and if I treat that as not being that important, it doesn't change my experience of that game. It made the end fun with some battles and stuff, but I can disregard the final 20 minutes of story from a 40-hour game.
Right. Those are the only important parts of the story to me now. Because
right.
the implications of that story are that, hey, that whole first part of the game was actually about this. And you played those same events again because it's this new one. And like the whole time throughout, it makes the Whisper stuff make sense of them trying to keep it all the same because that's like the planet or some separate thing that is fate or destiny or whatever, trying to make sure that Sephiroth doesn't win. And then he somehow convinces you to kill that. The fact that he's like, hey, you got to kill Destiny. But I guess he shows each of those people like, okay, so Aerith's going to die, Red 13. You're like running through a canyon and you're afraid of that for some reason. Barrett, I don't know.
Yeah.
I guess you're just fine, but you're still going to join in.
And then a meteor is going to come and destroy the Earth.
Oh, yeah, they do. He shows them that. But
yeah.
But that doesn't happen in it. So I don't know, maybe he...
No, that's the thing. That's what I sort of perceived as happening is that they are seeing glimpses of the future, which is what happens in the original game. And in the original game, they defeat Sephiroth and the meteor gets stopped and everyone survives. Like that thing of Red 13 running through the canyon is the ending of the original game where they succeed.
It's like... And it's like nature's back and they're all happy, right? That's
totally,
like the very
it
last
is
shot.
Because like the meteor maybe destroys like Midgar or something. Like obviously the weapons come, like stuff changes in the original game, but it changes for the better in the very end.
So if they see all that and are like, nah, let's roll the dice again, I reckon we can do it. Or they've been shown the wrong thing by Sephiroth or whatever.
That's what I think. I think Sephiroth is showing them what happens in the original game, what happens in their future in a misleading way. Because, no one wants Aerith to die, but she does die in the original game, or in the original story timeline, as a sacrifice to save the world. So I think it's not as straightforward as, like, this is an alternate vision of the future, now we've separated entirely from it, and I think it's just a way that Sephiroth is using the live stream or whatever in the future and the past to confuse them. I don't think it's as clear-cut as now everything's different.
I wouldn't necessarily either as well if it weren't for the fact that right at the end it says, now everything's different. Like that, that it might as well say that last little title. It's like, hey, by the way, fuck your sequels. We're going off the rails, baby. And I'm excited for that in some way, but I also think it's like a little bit disappointing for people who weren't looking forward to that, but I personally couldn't give a shit about remakes in general, so...
Yeah, I mean, I that could still just be a very generic, like, hey, if this is the first time, like, if you're playing this game for the first time, you don't know what's going to happen next. The sequel's going to come out in a couple of years, and you're going to have a very big adventure, and you don't know what's going to happen.
That is a wild interpretation of that. If it's like, hey, specifically, if this is the first time you're playing this, don't play the original, please. I don't know.
What I genuinely think is that they're sort of sitting on the fence. I think there's going to be some differences. I think most of it's going to be the same. I don't think it's going to be this massive change. That's what I think. I don't know if that's what I want. I think I would love the sort of thing that you're predicting, which is a very big departure and a new kind of story within the same world. I think that'd be great because, I have got the original always to refer back to.
Right. And I think how bombastic that ending is, and how much, like, the fact that you are killing a manifestation of destiny, I think is as clear of a way as they possibly can of conveying, like, we do not intend to continue this as a direct remake series.
Yeah. See, I think I'm not. I think I'm a little less charitable. I think they're saying, don't hold us to account on what the original game is. We'll make some changes, and you're not allowed to complain about it. That's my interpretation, and it could be wrong.
We have no idea, right? And I think that's my biggest problem with the ending, is that it deliberately makes things so unclear that it is just an unsatisfying cliffhanger either way. And just for what I interpret what they're trying to do, for them trying to convey, what I see it as, they didn't do a very good job right at the end there, because it just goes so quick. It so rapidly turns and changes that it just didn't feel like it had the same care put into it as the rest of it.
I understand that. I disagree because I had less writing on it, and still enjoyed it. But yeah, like, fuck, I'm very curious to see what happens next. Like,
same.
I'm really, really interested, and I think they did execute most of this game so well at such a high level that I'm just excited to play whatever comes next.
Totally. I'll play it either way. I would, at this point, prefer it to be a sequel that makes the ending of this make sense in context. But I guess when they start talking about the second part, they kind of have to show their cards, right? Like,
surely, yeah. Like, if you're, like, spot on in your interpretation, it wasn't a remake. It was this alternate interpretation. It's specifically, it is metatextually interacting with the original text and changing it. They've got to cop to that, surely.
Yeah. I like, it's called Final Fantasy VII 2 or something in my mind. Is like, this next bit is like a sequel to this game, which is a reinterpretation in a massive way of the first one, or kind of a sequel to the first one.
Yeah.
The only way that this story at this point in time makes sense is if you have fully played the original game. So that to me makes it a sequel.
Yeah, it's new. I think that's whatever it is. It's not been done before. I don't think.
It's cool. It's almost cool on like a fucking Kojima way of like, hey, Metal Gear Solid 2 is not actually about Snake anymore, and also it's about sequels sucking. Fuck you.
Right.
And this doesn't deliver it anywhere near as well as that right at the last little hurdle there, but conceptually, I think it's really, really cool. And
conceptually remakes are boring, so we're doing something different with it.
Yeah. If the next one is them actually doing something different with it and they admit that, then cool. I think there is an argument to be made that the misrepresentation of this one, in my mind, as part one of an entire remake is a little bit dicey and weird, but I don't know if it even is that still. And if it is just a straight up remake for the last parts, then why have this big weird fucking battle here? Like, then it makes that not make any sense.
If it's a straight remake for the next however many parts, don't have all the weird story stuff at the end. Just have a big battle. Like, just say Sephiroth showed up and you have to fight him at the end and he has a bunch of forms. Like, do it at the end of the freeway another
one of the
whatever.
Geneva things, or like... there's some fucking Midgard thing. You're fighting a big turret that's on the top of the tower. Like, there's any number of big final bosses you can pretend should be there. The fact that they've chosen to do it this way, and to me it has such wide-reaching implications for the story, is interesting, but delivered poorly to me.
Yeah, I'm very interested to see because like I've seen a lot of people theorizing about it. I've seen a lot of people putting a lot of thought into what actually happened and what's going to happen. I don't think I've read anything that I 100% agree with, and I'm not convinced that. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think theorizing in terms of that stuff is that interesting usually. Like, that's what I hated about shows like Lost and stuff like that. I don't care about the theories. I just want to see what plays out. There's no point really theorizing about it. But I want to hear from people who have finished this game. I want to hear if you're people who've played the original, if you haven't, what you think about it. If you read theories and it changed your perception of the game, if you're sort of like me and just disregarded it. I'm really keen to hear from people. I guess don't tweet spoilers at us publicly or post on our Facebook page or anything.
Yeah.
But
Well, and also like probably don't even email them to us because Tommy hasn't finished it. So I don't know where
just
we
put in
talk
the
about
spoiler. Put in the spoiler
Yeah,
to Adam
yeah,
and
yeah,
Ben.
true.
Final Fantasy spoilers inside. Don't read Tommy, and then send us what. No Tommy's allowed. Or just tweet at us, DM us individually. Of course, that's all fine.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. But yeah, fucking fascinating. Very, very interesting. Very curious to see what happens with the sequels.
It's the last thing I expected from this game was to be surprised like this. So
Yeah.
at least on that level, pretty cool. Whether or not the surprise was like, if somebody jumps out at you and instead of yelling surprise, they go like slurp eyes, and you're just like, oh, you got it a bit wrong right at the end. But the intention there is pretty cool, and I want to see you follow up on the party that you've promised by jumping out there. But they like tripped over my coffee table as they jumped out. So
but yeah, that'll bring us to the end of the sealed section this week. We'll definitely revisit this when Tommy finishes the game in 6 or 7 months' time.
Yeah, when they announce the second part, we'll be able to talk about what the implications are.
Yeah, but thanks for listening to the sealed section, everyone. We'll see you next week on Filthy Casuals.
See you later.